The Galaxy A73 5G has officially made me an expensive flagship phone hater. Now, don't get me wrong here, guys. I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't go spend your money on expensive flagships because they still offer some benefits over any other mid-range phones, such as a better camera and better performance. But to be honest, the A73 5G is almost so close to being a flagship, and you don't really need to pay 2 months of a typical average Malaysian salary to own one. So after using for 2 weeks, let me share with you on why I think this is the perfect mid-range phone that you should buy. If you have watched my first impressions video back then, you would have known that the Galaxy A73 5G is made out of a polycarbonate build. Now, that might sound bad when compared to the rest of the mid-range phones, which has already moved on to Gorilla Glass on its back and an aluminum frame. But to be honest, with such a build quality, you don't need to worry about having the back part crack if you accidentally drop the phone. And to be honest, the A73 5G is a very robust smartphone because over this 2-week review period, I have not put on a case on the phone, neither do I have a screen protector right here, though I do hate the fact that Samsung did not pre-apply one over here, and I'm really lazy to go all the way out to find a screen protector for it. I've dropped this phone from the table, like this height is a 3-foot table by the way, for at least 7 times during this 2-week review period. I really have slippery hands on this phone, and to be honest, the phone survived with no cracks on the front screen, only just a few major scuffs on the back here, which is at the camera bump and on the bottom frame right over here. So I would have to say that this is actually quite, I wouldn't say entirely drop proof, but then it actually survives some minor drops if you happen to be the kind of person that has a lot of accidents with phones. Now, unlike last year's Galaxy A series, the Galaxy A73 5G lacks a headphone jack, which to some people, it might be a deal breaker out there, but in my case, I've actually moved on to wireless earbuds, so it's not too much of an issue for me. And if I were to use wired audio, I would usually just plug in a USB-C amplifier to get better sound. Anyway, most headphone jacks output are really crappy, so you shouldn't find it too much of a deal breaker if you were to purchase the Galaxy A73 5G. Now, like the Galaxy A72, the A73 5G is still IP67 water resistance, which is rated to up to 1 meters of submersion and 30 minutes of submersion, which is actually pretty good if you want to take it to the pool and snap pictures with your friends and family inside the pool. So this is actually a pretty robust phone in all ways. Now, in terms of specs, the Galaxy A73 5G spec sheet is rather similar to the A52s 5G, which is powered by a Snapdragon 778G processor with 8GB of RAM and 256GB of expandable storage. Now, by all means, you would say that, hey Warren, why not just go for the A52s 5G, which is cheaper and performs the same as well? Well, I have to disagree with you on that because the Galaxy A73 5G has a larger display at 6.7 inches if you actually prefer a larger display. This is a full HD Plus Super AMOLED display that refreshes at 120Hz. So if you're coming from the A72, which doesn't have 5G but has the same display size, you are actually getting an upgrade right over here, and you have a larger screen than the A52s 5G. The A73 5G continues to have stereo speakers, which actually sound pretty good, and compared to other mid-range phones with stereo speakers, it actually sounds really great, and I think it's one of the best out there. And here's how it sounds like. The Galaxy A73 5G comes preloaded with Android 12 and One UI 4.1, and Samsung is promising up to 4 years of Android upgrades on this phone, which is way better than any other premium mid-range phones of the same class. Now, in terms of performance, I would have to say that it is actually pretty snappy. The Snapdragon 778G chip does really perform well, and it doesn't heat up easily while you're using it, unlike those Snapdragon 888 devices. But when it comes to gaming, the Galaxy A73 5G is actually pretty good in terms of gaming performance. I was able to enable 60 frames per second on games like Asphalt 9. But if you were to play more graphics-intensive games like Genshin, you might probably have to lower the graphics setting and play at 30 frames per second. And that's actually quite normal for a mid-range chipset like this. But nonetheless, this is one of the most powerful mid-range processors that you can get on a mid-range phone. Now, of course, compared to many other mid-range phones out there, Samsung software is definitely a lot more bloated than the rest, because once you boot up, it has already used up about 40 gigabytes of storage, which leaves you around 170 gigs of usable storage, which is actually quite a big deal for some people out there. Now, you can actually expand the storage with a micro SD card, but that's an additional cost if you're the budget-conscious people. But to be honest, most of the bloat inside here are not bloat anyway, because you might actually use them. Now, one of the good examples here is Samsung Pay, which you can actually save your credit cards, debit cards into the app and use this phone as a payment device. Now, this is something that none other mid-range phones can do right here in Malaysia, not unless if you're located in the US or other countries that supports Google Pay, then you can use the NFC functionality of those phones to make payment. But in Malaysia, you only get Samsung Pay as the only mobile NFC payment. Now, one of the highlight selling features of the Galaxy A series last year was their cameras, and Samsung has continued that effort on the Galaxy A73 5G by equipping it with a 108 megapixel optically stable camera alongside with a 12 megapixel ultra-wide, 5 megapixel macro and a 5 megapixel depth sensor. Now, by all means, it is actually quite a disappointment that they removed the telephoto lens that was found on the Galaxy A72, but I'm sure that's some kind of cost-cutting measure right over here. But seriously, Samsung should just include that. I don't mind having the same sensors, to be honest, because it is an upgraded phone anyway with a better processor. But anyways, speaking of the camera, now even though it is a 108 megapixel optical stabilized camera, you don't expect the same image quality as the S22 Ultra. Now, mainly because the sensor size is actually smaller than the S22 Ultra, and also the image signal processing engine on this phone is not as great as the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1. So in terms of the image quality, they are pretty possible for social media uploads with good colors, and I would have to say that some photos actually look washed out at times. But to be honest, it is probably one of the best mid-range phone cameras that you can get out there. In terms of low light performance, this phone is okay, it's possible. It's not the best low light shooter out there, but if you do really need to take photos in low light, it will actually do the job fine for a mid-range phone, and it's better than the rest out there. Now, having an optically stabilized camera also means that you can take better videos, and I'm glad to report that the A73 5G's 108 megapixel main camera can take really good 4K 30 frames video, and I think the colors are really great and the stabilization is really good, and it's the best that I've seen on a mid-range phone. In terms of selfies, the Galaxy A73 5G does it with a 32 megapixel front sensor, which is high resolution enough for selfies, and I think it's decently wide enough for groupies as well. Now, even though the Galaxy A73 5G doesn't take the best photos of all mid-range phones, I'm really glad that Samsung has included some photography modes that I really appreciate, such as single take that actually takes 10 seconds of your photo and outputs in different photography styles, and a pro video mode that actually lets you configure how you want your video to be according to the ISO and shutter speed that you want. I'm really glad that Samsung has decided to equip all its A series with a 5000 mAh battery, and the Galaxy A73 5G has it with support for 25 watts fast charging. Now, even though this is not the fastest charging speed in the industry right now, it still charges pretty fast at around 80 to 90 minutes if you're charging from single digits, and I have to say that that's actually pretty decent. Now, of course, in terms of battery life, I was able to get up to about 5 hours of screen on time on a single charge before requiring to charge, which is, to be honest, not the best, neither the worst, which I think is pretty sufficient for most people out there if that's what you're doing. If you're doing some moderate tasks on it and having about 2 hours of screen on time, you can easily get up to 2 days of battery life, which is actually pretty awesome on a mid-range phone. So there you have it. The Galaxy A73 5G is a good all-rounder mid-range phone that you should definitely go check out. Even though its asking price of 2,100 ringgit is a little expensive than the competition, but to be honest, there are a lot of selling points that this phone offers that others don't, such as IP67 water and dust resistance, Samsung Pay, 4 years of Android upgrades, and a pretty good 108 megapixel optically stabilized camera. So yep, that's all for my review of the Galaxy A73 5G for today. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below, and be sure to subscribe and give us a thumbs up if you like what you saw, and I will see you guys in our next video.